Welcome to the Infuse Compassion podcast, hosted by me, Amy Quisenberry.
And me, Mark Carpenter.
We are on a mission to make this world a kinder place for us all by bringing healthier human connection to communities, families, and organizations of all types and sizes.
Our goal is to create stronger relationships, more inspired teams, increased trust, and improved results.
So let's get started with more ways to infuse compassion into our world.
Welcome, Compassionators, to the next episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. So glad you're here with us. Thank you for joining us. We had a fantastic conversation that was in last week's episode with Nancy Gunter. And Nancy talked about communicating across generations. And oh boy, we got into just the surface of the topic. There was a lot of depth. I think we could have gone beyond if we'd wanted to take more time. But just such a fascinating conversation about the importance of listening and being curious across generations. So Amy, let's start with you. Your perspective. What jumped out to you about that conversation that we had with Nancy?
Well, there were several things, but there were a couple of key items that I really want to spotlight. One is when we think about, one of the reasons, Mark, why you and I came to this world of compassion, me taking it from start with compassion, expanding it into infuse compassion, right? It was to influence organizations. It was to help create a more compassionate world by helping leaders become more compassionate. It's a big part of our Infuse Compassion into Companies conference, right? But then when we went to the podcast, we said, we want it open for all. Let's not limit it to companies. But Nancy brought us right back there. And she brought us right back there because how her journey in this world started was because she realized that she was struggling to do her job well as a supervisor at the YMCA. There was a generational gap between herself and the people that she was leading. And she said, I need to do a better job. I need to learn about these people. That's going to help me be a better leader. And I think that this is for anybody that's a leader, regardless of who you're leading, where you're leading. If you act as a leader, foundationally, if we want to create a more compassionate world, it's having that ability to reflect, the humility, the desire to grow and evolve and want to be a positive influence and impact in the lives of the people around us. Nancy illustrated that so beautifully in her example from years ago. And currently in a coaching session she was just doing this morning, she did as well. So that's one of the key things. There's more, but let me take a breath and let you get in on this.
Well, as you're talking, there was a word that Nancy used repeatedly that just stood out to me, and that's coming back to me as you're talking about it too. And that word is curiosity. To be curious as to what people in different generations are thinking. And I think that can even apply just to people in general. But the more that we can be curious about the other person's perspective, the better we're going to listen to what they have to say, the better we're going to understand. And then we increase our communication because I can understand where they're coming from and I can communicate in a way that they're going to understand my thoughts. She also mentioned that curiosity opens us up to understand what we have more in common. And my belief is we have a lot more in common than we have different with other people in the world. We tend to focus, and I think the media does this, we focus a lot on the differences and the conflicts that we have. But I think we have a lot more in common than we have different if we will just listen to each other and be a little more curious in the conversations that we have.
So one of the things that Nancy spoke about is that a lot of times we think we're listening, right? We think that we're listening, but we're listening through our experiences from our perspective, and the ability is to truly be present and to listen and try to understand where they are coming from. And I think this is a really important key here of, and I think this means that judgments, assumptions, all of this really needs, the volume needs to be turned down on this. For that person to really, for you to really understand what they're trying to share with you, is to really be present. And she even spoke, we talked briefly about, but how do you make that happen? And one of the ways to get present is to focus on your senses, to take just one sense. And we didn't get into this that much. She spoke about it very, very briefly. But I actually have a friend who struggles with anxiety. They truly have it. My heart goes out to them. But their therapist taught them this tool of, when they are in a moment of anxiety, what they do is they focus on their breath pattern. They pick 5 things in the room. One of their senses, sometimes they have to do multiple, but that makes such a difference. So even just sitting there, to just take a moment and say, what am I smelling? Just one of your senses. You don't have to make it public to the people around you, but you can use your senses, right?
Yeah. And I love that point, to bring you back to the moment. It's funny, you almost anticipated a question I wanted to ask you, which is, what are some other tips that you have used to help you listen better? And I'm going to give you a chance to think about the answer to that question, because I want to share, listening is a really important topic in my world too. And even in my book, Lead Like a Person, Not Like a Position, I talk about listening intently as one of the keys to leading with greater humanity, leading people. You got to listen to people to lead. And one of the pieces of research that I just find fascinating around why it's hard to listen is Oscar Trimboli's 125, 400, 900 rule. And so I'm just going to share what that means. We as English speakers in the human language, or as human beings, we speak at about 125 words per minute, but we can listen at up to 400 words per minute. And so think about the implications there, that if I can listen faster than you can talk, it's really easy for me to get distracted. And then the 900 is, we can think at about 900 words per minute. And so even as I'm talking to you, I can really only get out of my mouth about 14% of what I'm thinking, because of the difference between the 900 and the 125. And so sometimes it's hard for us to focus, and it's hard for other people to even communicate what they're saying to us. So I'd love to get from you, what's a tip that you have that will help us listen? And we'll tie it into this across generations. How do we listen better to understand people with different generations?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So I created a framework. It's called Start with Compassion. Compassion is an acronym. The first S in compassion is silence the judger. All right. And one of the reasons, and it's actually I call it the most critical component of the framework. Without it, the framework cannot work. Because as soon as we go into a judgmental stance, as soon as we go into a place of judgment, we've severed the compassionate connection. Yeah. Everything, the letters that came before that first S, we severed all of that, right? And so one of the things that I like to say is to just turn the voice down on the judgment. If we notice, and a lot of times it's self-inflicted, we're judging ourselves. Right? We speak
Most
to
of the
ourselves.
time, I would say.
Yeah. We speak to ourselves in ways, oh, I know, baby. So today is grooming day. And so she ended up on my lap, folks, magically through the power of editing, because her brother, Little Bit, got, we have a mobile groomer, and they came in and got Little Bit. And so she's nervous. She's next, but she's ready to get down. So this is Koali, everybody. This is the little one that you hear in the background sometimes.
And for those that aren't on video with us, tell us who Quali is or what Quali is.
Oh, Koali is a schnoodle. We think, she's a rescue, so we do our best, right? We think that she's a schnoodle, which is a
Schnauzer.
Thank you, Schnauzer Poodle mix. And she was actually my inspiration for starting my compassionate work. It was actually the people who saved her life. Yeah, but that'll be another episode.
So she belongs on the podcast. That's all I wanted to get to.
Totally belongs on the podcast. All right. So I need you to tell me again what I'm supposed to be talking about right now.
Tips on listening is what we're talking about. And so you were going with silence the judger. That's the first place. Is that
yes?
It's usually the judgmental self-talk that's going on here, and it has much more to do with us than it does with the other person. If I'm hearing you right.
Right. It 100% does. See, when we go into a judgmental state, okay, if we go into a judgmental state, what happens is what is happening in our mind is based on the information that we have.
Yeah.
There's a whole world about the person that's standing across from us that we know nothing about. And so when we go into a judgmental stance, we literally rob them of their autonomy, and we're making it about us.
Yeah.
And I want everybody to just hear that for a minute. Because when we think about connecting with somebody else, when we think about listening to somebody else, when we think about truly understanding somebody else, we're not making it about us. We're trying to listen and understand them and what they're trying to share with us. And I just want to add this piece because she said something really powerful about, this was when we got into the positive intelligence piece. And she said, anytime we're in a fear-based, we stop listening when we go into fear.
Yeah.
We can't be present and listen and truly connect if we are in a fear, if we are in some shame, blame, something within the fear category of the 5 emotions.
Yeah, the fear state, if you will. Yeah.
Right. We can't be present and we can't be listening and truly connect if we are in a place of fear.
Yeah. Totally agree with that. There was another word that Nancy used that I loved, which was intentionally. That we need to be more intentional about our listening and intentional about how we communicate with different generations so that it's a way that they understand it, not just so much the way that we understand it. And when it comes to listening, our intent makes a huge difference. If my intent is just to communicate what's on my mind and just get it out, that's a different intent than I want to make sure that they fully understand and they fully understand how it's important to them. They understand it from their perspective. That's a different intent than I just want to get my communication out than to have it really understood. And that part of that intent is, and why is it good for them? And so coming from that perspective too, of I need to share this information, but why is it important for them? And then I'm going to share that a little bit differently than I just need to get this information out so that people understand that I know this or that I understand this. And so our intentions and being intentional about how we communicate and why we're communicating really drives also how we're listening as well. If I'm listening with the intention of understanding, with that curiosity in the background, I'm going to listen better than if I'm just listening to get through this moment.
Right. And that it's not a switch that you flip on and off. She said she actually connected it to sports.
Yeah.
She said, we need to practice this. We need to practice it. And I think that this is such an important part of anything that we do. If we really want to make a change, if we really want to create a more compassionate world, it starts with each of us. And what are we going to do differently to help us show up? Now, I have a story that I'd like to share. Okay. It's a tough story. I do not look good in this story. Okay. But this was one of the changing moments in my life where I really had to confront the way I was showing up. And we had a mobile groomer at our house, actually. And when the groomer pulls up, the dogs can sometimes hear the groomer and they start barking. And my husband got frustrated one time, and I took that fear into this. Listen, let me be really clear. My husband is a sweetheart. Okay. He's like the most gentle man in the world, but I don't want to, I don't want to frustrate my husband. I don't want to frustrate anybody. Right. But in this particular instance, the groomer is out front, and they're taking all of this time. They're walking across our lawn, and they can hear the dogs. They're laughing. They think it's funny. My fear of is he, because he's in the middle of facilitating a training, is he going to get frustrated and yell? Understandably so. Excuse me. I went outside and I yelled at the groomer. And I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. I said, you're traipsing back and forth on our lawn. You can hear our dogs barking. And you think it's funny. And it's not funny because we both work from home. I said, I don't know what kind of anxiety my husband is going through right now. And I didn't call it anxiety. I think I said the frustration that he must be feeling because he's trying to facilitate a training and he can't because there are these dogs barking. I was way more frustrated than how I presented it here. I was leaning in, as they say, right? And I had to stop. As I'm seeing the shock on his face, and I went, I'm so sorry. I said, you did not deserve any of that. Those were my emotions to control. That's not his problem. There's a better way I could have handled that. I sat in that shame for like 3 weeks. He would not accept my apology. Mm. He refused to accept it, and he had every right to refuse. I took it into therapy, and I had to forgive myself. I had to forgive the fear that I had with my husband of, I don't want to frustrate him on a call because I know how that feels for me. I had to deal with that. And then I had to forgive him for not forgiving me. So I had to do all of this forgiveness work. And through that and other pieces, I actually created the Start with Compassion framework. That's one of the pieces of, I'm done showing up angry and lacking the ability to control my emotions. I'm done with that. So,
here's what stands out to me in that story. You were so concerned about protecting your husband's frustration that you were the one that got frustrated.
That's right. That's it. That's
and isn't that ironic? There's some great irony in there too, that in trying to protect somebody else's situation, we lash out ourselves. We become the worst version of ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah. That's right. And think about that in terms of the generations, because a lot of times we'll think, well, okay, but they're just in that generation, they don't get it. Mm-hmm. And we cast that off on them, but that's really about us. Yeah. That's our problem. That's our challenge to deal with. Well, one of the other points that came up, and I think it was even in the after conversation that we had with Nancy, was the connection between generations and diversity.
I know. I brought that
And you were
Wasn't
the one
that
that brought that up.
fascinating?
And so I wanted
Yeah.
to talk about that a little bit more here. I made a note of that because I wanted to talk about that. We think of diversity often in terms of educational background and race and nationality and just all these other components. But I'm not sure I ever thought of it in terms of generationally. Should that be part of the way that we look at diversity within the workplace and the value that that's going to bring? So I'm going to turn it to you. I wanted to bring up that topic, but I want it mostly to go back to you because you were the one that brought it up. I want to get your thoughts around that connection between generations and how we communicate with generations in the workplace and diversity within the workplace.
Well, and the question that I posed to her from a curiosity place was, how many of your clients come to you, Nancy, from a DEIB perspective of it's really important for our employees to understand each other from a generational perspective. That's an intersection within the diversity spectrum, right? And I was sadly, there wasn't a surprise because I had no preconceived notion, but I was sad to learn that not a lot of people are actually looking at that.
Yeah.
And I think I would really encourage organizations to definitely look at that. I think one of the things that she spoke about is right now, organizations have at least 3 of the generations in them. Some have 4 and some even have 5.
Yeah, I think she said most even have 4.
Yes. And so when we think about wanting to have a company that is successful, it begins with your employees understanding each other and knowing how to support each other. And so when I look at DEI and B, I want to get to the B. I understand that the D, the E, and the I understand it's all important. But in my heart, growing up, being in situations where I didn't feel like I belonged, this is really important to me.
Yeah.
The belonging, because I don't care how diverse or inclusive we are. If people at the end of the day don't feel like they belong, like their words matter, like they're a person and they're seen as a person, and that they feel comfortable and safe in that environment, we're not going to be able to hold on to those employees, folks.
Yeah. And now I'm going to throw a little quiz question at you to see if you remember. This is a memory test from our conversation with Nancy. Which generations are responsible for improving that communication, for improving that sense of belonging across the generations?
All
of them. Thank you.
All of them.
Yeah. Because sometimes we think, well, but that's the responsibility of the older people. The older generations need to make the younger generations feel included. And I loved that she said, no, this is the responsibility of all of us.
That's right.
And sometimes it's hard to get through that power dynamic. She talked about that a little bit when you're coming in new and maybe you've got a leader who's in a different generation than you, or maybe you're coming in as somebody that's a little more senior, but you've got somebody younger than you that is your leader. There's some power dynamic there that maybe makes that challenging. But if both sides take the responsibility to say, how can we communicate better? How can we understand each other better? How can we maintain that curiosity in our conversations and in our relationships? That's going to strengthen the organization. And in the end, it's going to strengthen your outcomes. Yes, it's going to keep people there. It's going to improve your retention, but it's really going to improve the outcomes because teams are going to work together more effectively to get better results within the organization.
And that is, listen, nobody starts an organization because they don't want to be successful. Right. So, really, that is absolutely huge. I want to talk about, if you're okay with it, positive intelligence. I mentioned it earlier for just a minute.
It was the next item on my list.
This blew my mind. So let me ask you, let's get your perspective. What are some of your key takeaways from the positive intelligence piece?
Yeah, I love that she connected positive intelligence with resilience.
Mm.
And resilience, I think, is such an important word. I'll go back to one of the episodes that we had earlier with Jody Brown when she was talking about fighting through depression. But she also talks a lot about resilience. And resilience isn't just getting through. Resilience is getting through a difficult time and coming out better on the other side. And so I loved that perspective that positive intelligence, which is keeping ourselves in a positive frame, will help us get through difficult situations and come out better. That's how I was connecting it with resilience. And so I just think that's such an important component of how we work together and really understand each other across generations, is to come at it with that attitude of positive intelligence, that we want to be better, that we want to work better together. Again, I guess it goes back to that intent that I was talking about earlier, and being very intentional about how we come into those relationships.
And to build on the piece that you were talking about, it's that ability. It's when we think about being positive, it's not, and I really love this, it's not like fluff and, oh, everything is going to be all right. But it's building the skills, building the tools, having tools available that help you gain a more positive perspective of, and just again, going back to the story that I shared, I could have stayed in shame. I could have stayed in shame. Absolutely. I could have buried that, but I turned it into a positive and now have this whole start with compassion, infuse compassion world, right? Because that was a critical catalyst in my just wanting to evolve and become a better human being, of just stopping and saying, is that really who you want to be?
And that's the resilience part. That's the not just getting through that and putting that behind you, but taking that moment and saying, how can I make this better? How can I make myself better based on this moment? Even those moments of stumbling, that if you have that positive intelligence, you can turn it into something better. That's an improvement on the backside.
That's right. That's right. I know, Mark, you and I could talk about this all day long. Is there anything that you want to share before we end this?
There was another great comment that you made, and I think this was off the air. It was about leaders, great leaders, almost intuitively have, you called it the humility gene, that we have. Great leaders will always have that innate curiosity, that they silence the judger, as you talk about. And so I want you to just share your thoughts a little bit more on that and how that connects into leading really across generations.
Yeah. Well, I was really struck by Nancy's the humility that she showed in the origin story from decades ago to just again this morning in a coaching session, of her ability to be able to reflect on how she was showing up as a human being, and to stop and say, not only is it my job to be better. She never said that. She never said that.
Yeah.
But in my mind as leaders, I'm saying, hey folks, it's our job. Okay. But for her to really say, I want to do better. I want to be better. And a lot of times it's, I'm not showing, I want to be better and I'm not being better. So what do I need to do? There's a humility component there. When leaders stop and truly sit, this is what I love about the way that she talked about, especially the coaching session from this morning. She didn't tear herself up. She didn't kick herself around, but she did realize and say, you know what? I know that there's a better way. Oh gosh, I should have done this. Okay, great. So now she's going to have another chance to do this. And I think that as not even leaders, as human beings walking on the planet, for us to stop and really reflect, I think I'll get it. All great leaders have a humility gene in them. I truly believe that they do. Because if we're not stopping and reflecting and taking stock on what we're doing and what we're not doing, right? Nancy said it at one point, what people are saying, how they're saying it, even what they're not saying, right? Maybe emotions that they're showing, but words that are not coming out. If we're not stopping and paying attention, and that takes the humility to stop and not make it about us, but to focus on them. That to me is a difference maker.
Yeah. And leadership is not by title. Leadership is by behavior. And I want to have that lead into kind of my last thought here and a challenge that I want to put out to our Compassionators.
Let's do it.
I haven't prepared Amy for this at all, but I'm going to put out a challenge there to be a leader by finding somebody from a different generation this week and really getting curious. And as you're talking to them, really listen and understand and see what it does. See how it impacts you. See how it impacts your relationship with that person. And this can be in your work life or your personal life. But find somebody from a very different generation from you and be intentional about your curiosity, about your listening, and communicating in a way that they will understand.
Yeah, I love that challenge. I'm going to end that, Mark. If you're an organization out there and you've got multiple generations and you're realizing, you know what, we're not really understanding each other, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to Nancy. Really, reach out to Nancy, because I believe that she could be the difference that your company needs right now.
And all her information is going to be in the show notes. So not only in this episode, but you've got it in the previous episode. You've got Nancy's information.
That's right.
Compassionators, thank you for joining us for another episode. Join us again next week, and we look forward to talking to you some more.
You know we do. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share a review and like the podcast so other Compassionators can join us. Until next time, let's all do something each day to infuse compassion into the world. For more information on our guests, see the show notes. For more information on Mark and Amy, go to infusecompassion.com.